Good evening, everybody. It's Mario with Motorcycle Knuckle Busters, and we're at it again. Once again, we're attempting to bring you a bunch of great guests. This guest this evening, I think, is going to be a lot of fun. We really, here at the show, we embrace the diversity of the motorcycle community. We think people don't understand, everybody that's out there, the talent that's out there. The four corners of the world brings a lot of great people to what we do and what we enjoy. My next guest, for those of you that know me, you know that I like adventure, I like travel, I love culture, and I love to read. So this next guest really covers all those things. I've been to 50 countries. He's blown that away. I've been to, I've ridden a bunch of different places. I've tried a bunch of different things. I've experienced a lot of stuff, but this gentleman has done it all, and he's got a lot of books about it, and that's how I'm tied into books. But he's done documentaries on his riding and everything else. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Gregory Frazier.
Hi, Mario. Nice to be with your audience.
Well, it's great to have you, and I'm sure they're really looking forward to hearing more about you and all of your adventures and everything else. So thank you for coming on this evening. I know you've got a lot of things I'm sure going on, so taking a little time out of your day to do this isn't always the easiest thing. So I really want to start with the early stuff. I mean, I don't know, I'm familiar with some of your books and some of the things you've done, but where did you grow up at? Where were you raised?
I was raised by a Quaker family. I went to a Quaker boarding school. The Quakers had me under their thumb until I could wiggle out on a motorcycle and get out onto the roads of America, much in the way Kerouac reported on the road with his monumental book, which is really a template for a lot of travel, motorcycle films and books. Anyway, I got on my first motorcycle at the age of about 15. My buddy had a moped. You remember those two-stroke kind of pedal? And he let me ride about maybe 200 or 300 yards, turn around and come back, and I was hooked. And that motorcycle experience took me out from under the thumb of the Quakers. I got out of a Quaker college and dropped out, inhaled a lot of plant extract in the early 60s, but I was hooked on the motorcycles. I think in 68, my antenna went up when I heard a song that said, "Get out on the highway looking for adventure." And that was the lead for a movie that went on to be a rock movie. And still, I watch it once a year just to get with the guys in the movie. They're so cool.
Right.
Anyway, that's how I got into motorcycles. My Quaker parents were against it. My girlfriend at the time was kind of, motorcycles, why don't you get a car?
Sure.
And I did have a car. I had a couple of them. My first one was a hearse. I thought, well, that'll let the motorcycle fit in the back. Nice Cadillac, 1949. But I was still hooked on the motorcycles. And today I'm still hooked. I still find that after 1 million miles and 6 rides around the world, getting on a motorcycle for me is still fun. I look forward to the challenge of dealing with traffic, weather, road conditions, and managing them, not to a degree where I'm unhappy doing it. Well, nobody wants to be in the cold, but I still got a smile on my face at the end of the day.
Sure.
Motorcycle is still fun.
So growing up in a Quaker family, I mean, now Quakers, the stronghold for Quakers back in early times was Pennsylvania. So where was that at?
I went to a Quaker boarding school in Westchester, Pennsylvania. I went to a Quaker college for 2 years in Indiana, and that's where I wiggled out from under the Quaker thumb. But I'm based out there in the East Coast. That's the heritage.
Okay, yeah, I figured as much. So And then, so then you get 15, you discover what it's like to get on two wheels. The love starts growing and everything else. But you've got doctor before your name, so obviously you went back to school. So where'd you go to school at?
Well, actually, I dropped out. My parents wanted me to be a physician. My grandfather was the second American Indian doctor in the country, and I was supposed to follow in his footsteps. And one day, looking through a microscope at an amoeba split, I heard my buddy's Harley out in the parking lot. And I said, I'm out. No more of looking at amoebas splitting under microscopes. I'm going to be on the motorcycles. So
Okay.
I dropped out, tuned in. I'm one of those guys that Woodstock era, let's put it that way. My first motorcycle was a 305 Super Hawk Honda. In Japanese, they called it a beer can motorcycle. And I took that to Sturgis. I was the only guy on a Japanese motorcycle at Sturgis, camped out in the city park back in that must have been 67.
Okay.
And I trashed it pretty good. I didn't, my learning curve was still pretty steep. I got rid of it. And then a year later, I met a guy in Cook City, Montana, and he was on one of those Super Hawks, had his kid on the back. I had traveled across the country with a guy on the back, overloaded. And I told the guy, I said, I blew up a Super Hawk just like you're using. And his buddy had a BMW R60, and it was beautiful. And
Sure.
the guy said, well, I'm having trouble with my Super Hawk up here at the high altitude. What do you think? And I said something like, well, my next motorcycle is going to be like your buddies at BMW. It's maintenance free. Little did I know that this guy went on to write a million-seller book called Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. I was hacked, but I did buy a brand new BMW that year, as I predicted, and I found out that all motorcycles require a degree of maintenance. My second motorcycle was a $25 Indian Chief, 1945. And that's where the adventure began. Getting across town on a $25 Indian Chief was an adventure.
I bet.
Yeah, well, the guys in Billings, Montana that were in the Indian club said, look, we'll teach you how to be a motorcyclist and how to maintain your motorcycle and, the right and wrong things to do. But there's one rule. I said, rule? What rule? And they said, you don't cross the line to the Harley Davidson guys. And this is back in the 60s. There was a real line in the sand. You were an Indian guy, you were a Harley guy. Big time. Anyway, I eventually crossed the line and got into the Harley world a few times. To me, they're machines, and I love them. I still have one Indian Chief, and I pet it as I walk by. I don't think I'll let it go. But anyway, that's some of the history. I went on to you asked about my education. I went on to get a master's degree in business. I had a bachelor's degree in business, and I ended up in the world of economics. And then I became a corporate pooch, the ties and the accountants and the lawyers and the big money game. And one day I was sitting across from a lawyer, a CPA, and a guy from the IRS, and they were grilling me in my office, and I saw a guy on a Harley go past the window with a sleeping bag on the back. And I said, I'm out of this corporate world. I want to do what that guy's doing. Now I just have to figure out a way to pay for it. And
Sure.
when you go into the educational world to that degree, you have to learn, or you did back then, to write. And that's what I knew how to do, was write. So
Okay.
we did my first book, and it was called Motorcycle Sex. I'd gone to a publisher that I'd worked with on data, said, I want to write books about motorcycles. And he said, we don't know anything about motorcycles, but we
So
know
what
that
year was
sex
that?
sells. Oh, that had to be about 1992, 91, somewhere in there. Um, and so that was the title of the first book, Motorcycle Sex. And we sold a bunch of them. And back then, I could make $10, $15 for a book instead of the dollar that I make for a book now. So I thought, well, I can make money doing books. I was writing the scripts for films, and I produced about a dozen motorcycle travel videos. Again, using my writing background. And I'm now 16 books into the motorcycle book world. I've been published twice by the world's largest motor book publisher. That's called Motor Books. They did one book. These are nice books, all color, coffee table style books with pages that you can fold, and now they've gone digital.
Right.
And I've done a half a dozen smaller publications, but 16 books, and I'm got maybe two more left in me.
Okay. So you started writing books. I mean, when did the real adventure writing start kicking in? I mean, uh, I know you've ridden across your circumference of the world 6 times. So when did that begin?
I think the first hook was set when I saw a poster in a BMW motorcycle shop of a guy in South America on a motorcycle. His name was Danny Liska, and he had made a trip from his home in Nebraska up to Dead Horse, Alaska, and then down to the bottom of South America. And um, BMW and motorcycle magazines had covered his trip a little bit. He was really unknown at the time. And I saw that poster, and I thought, man, a guy can ride a motorcycle to South America? And
Yeah,
it was like an eye opener. I knew that I could maybe get to Alaska, but South America? So anyway, the hook was set when I saw that. And I said, okay. And his book was titled Two Wheels to Adventure. So there's the motorcycle and the adventure hook having been set.
sure.
And then I made trips to Alaska and later on around the world. And I've been down to now South America 3 times with motorcycles. Um, but that was where the hook was set.
Okay. And so, like you said, you've done this 6 times. Now, I think I was reading somewhere, there was something unique about your fifth trip. Um, wasn't there? You had a guest? You took somebody along with you?
Yeah, my previous 4 trips were solo, and a woman who was 63 years old met me, and I gave her a business card, and she looked at my website, and she became enamored with motorcycles. She'd never been on one. She was a grandmother, had 6 grandchildren, 3 lovely daughters, a couple of marriages. She was a trophy wife at one of them, and she contacted me and said, I want to meet you and find out more about this motorcycle and travel that you do. And we developed a friendship. And she said, I want to go around the world on a motorcycle, but I don't want to drive. And I said, well, um, you know, packing a lady on the back is a tough job. It no longer is my trip, it's our trip. And I threw up a bunch of barriers. And she had a barrier, a serious one. She was in early stages of Parkinson's. Uh,
Okay.
and she wanted to do this trip around the world on a motorcycle before the Parkinson's brought her to an end. So we made a couple of short trips, and then finally she said, "Okay, let's do it." And I said, "No, I don't have time, and it takes money." And she said, "I'll pay." Up there was the hook. It was set. It's like a big lure. And so I presented her with a budget of what it would take for 2 of us on one new motorcycle to go around the world. And she said, well, I didn't realize it would cost that much. So we ended up using 4 motorcycles that I have stashed around the globe on different continents. And then one that I jointly owned with a doctor down in South Africa for the African leg. So we used 5 motorcycles. It took us about 14 months. We did about 30,000 miles. We were on 5 continents. And at the end, we were still on speaking terms, which was amazing because I'm an old blown. And here, this lovely lady had been on the back. But I remember we were in Argentina and we were stuck there. And at the restaurant, I nailed a carafe of wine before the main menu had come. And she said, you have a problem with alcohol? I said, no, I have a problem with you. I'd been with her now for about 5 months to Alaska and down through South America. And it was me. I just wasn't used to having a companion and a female,
Right.
and one with this disease of Parkinson's, which wasn't good.
No, it's not.
But we managed and we ended up friends. When she had to go into an assisted care facility, on her wall in her room were pictures of our trip around the world. And I said, what's this? You've got grandkids and daughters. Oh, I got their picture there too. But she said, you know, that was the biggest thing I've done in my life. She said, I was a dancer. I was a trophy wife, kids, grandkids, was into the money game for a while. And that trip around the world, you took me on the motorcycle, and the people that we met was the highlight of my life.
Sure.
It was good karma, and I wish her well wherever her spirit is now. We had a tough 14 months, her trying to put up with me. And I remember once I said, hey, those drugs they're giving you for Parkinson's, because she took a cocktail, 5 or 6 different pills a couple times a day. I said, give me a handful of those. I need whatever it is that mellows you out. So that was trip number 5.
That was number 5. So how did her family react to all of that?
I remember the daughter said, Mom, what are you doing? Getting on the back of a motorcycle with a guy that has no visible means of support and long hair. Mom, what are you doing? she went against their best efforts, and in the end, I think the daughters were able to get it.
Sure.
That this was a goal that she wanted to do. And she made a couple of presentations to Parkinson's audiences later about her experience that was motivational to the audience.
Well, that's a hell of a swan song, you know. I mean, it really is. And, you know, to go out, you know, that way, you know, ending your life knowing that, you know, things are not going good for you health wise, to be able to do that. And you were the person that could deliver that for her. So pretty remarkable that you were able to do that.
Well, I wouldn't do it again. We had 3 rules. I said, look, I'm the captain of the ship. Before we leave for Alaska, let's get these rules down. Number 1, I'm not dealing with cutting food. I'm not a healthcare provider. I'm not dealing with bathrooms, and I'm not dealing with dressing. You do your own thing. When you can't do it, trip is over. So we went to Alaska and we got back to Denver, Colorado. She lived in just south of Denver. And I said, well, that was a tough ride. We spent about a month on the road getting used to each other. And I said, kind of hoping that she would say, well, the rest of the trip is off. It was too hard. Because we did from Seattle to my place in Montana, we did 950 miles in one day. I cut the grass at my place in Montana. And she was literally drooling when we got to Montana. This is on a KLR 650 single. Next day, we got up and did the 550 miles down to Denver when she was really drooling. And I said, let's let the dust settle for a week, and we'll meet, and I'll talk about the things I saw on our trip that you did wrong. And she said, well, do I get to talk about the things that I saw that you did wrong? And hey,
Fair enough.
it's a two-way street. But we ironed them out and went on around the world.
That's outstanding. So you talk about the fact that she loved the people you met, and I'm sure for you, to venture around the world and to see these different cultures and people, that's probably the same. So tell us some of the, places you've been, stories, people that stood out in your mind.
Well, first, let me say that when I look back on the million miles that I've done on motorcycles, plus the 6 trips around the world, it's not the places that come to mind. It's the people that I've
Sure.
met on those journeys. Just last week, I was up in Iowa on a big loop, 4,000 miles up to the National Motorcycle Museum in Anamosa.
Did you go
And
see Jill?
what's that?
Did you go by and see Jill?
No, it was Sunday.
No,
And
did you see Jill? Jill Parham.
no, it was Sunday. Uh, I leave people alone on Sunday. The museum was open,
Oh,
but
I
I
got you.
didn't stop to see her. But here's the story. My 8 miles from town, my KLR's chain breaks and drops onto the interstate at 70 miles an hour. And I roll to a stop and I go back and I'm picking up the chain and a big, nice, big black truck. He gets out and he says, you need any help? I said, no, I've got a spare master link and I think I got this sussed. And so he said, let me turn on the flashers. So the master link didn't work. He and I got our hands dirty trying to get the chain rethreaded through the sprockets on the side of the road. We got to talking. He owned an Indian motorcycle, 2016. But he was, before that, he'd been a Harley guy. So we had Indian motorcycles in common. And then he said his wife's name was Aileen, Aileen. And he said, it's a very rare name. I said, not that rare. My mother's name was Eileen, Aileen, just pronounced differently. And then we discovered some other commonalities. But the bottom line, it was like 3 o'clock in the afternoon and Saturday, and I was 8 miles from my motel with a chain that wasn't any good. And he said, let me call over to J&P Cycles. Maybe they've got something we can cop together. He called his wife. She came out, parked behind my motorcycle, and dealt with the state trooper when that guy stopped and said, hey, what's going on here? I didn't have to deal with him. And my buddy, his nickname is Smalls. He popped me in his truck, took me over to J&P Cycles. They had the exact chain that I needed for a Kawasaki at J&P Cycles. Now, J&P Cycles is not really known for Japanese aftermarket parts. But it was the right length. We didn't have to grind it, had the master length, and I was back rolling by 5 o'clock. Now, at 5 o'clock, they would have closed. It was karma that this guy decides to pull over and help a Kawasaki guy on the side of the road, that few seconds that we had in common. Anyway, he and I, it was cosmic. And his wife turned out to be from a reservation where my grandfather had delivered a lot of babies back in the early 1900s. So there may have been even a native connect with her.
That's
but
cool.
anyway, cosmic. But anyway, Smalls, of my 4,000-mile trip that I made last week, he and his wife stand out. Now, it wasn't motorcycles, it was just kindness on his part.
Yes.
He chose to stop. I didn't choose to stop. But anyway, very cool guy. National Motorcycle Museum, very cool place. If you're ever anywhere near that corner of Iowa, stop in the museum, look at the motorcycles. I've got one in there I donated to John when he was alive. It was a KLR 6 that I took around the world, and it's the only motorcycle out of the 450 they've got that went around the world. I asked him, I said, do people look at it? He's, oh yeah, a lot of people are curious. We got racers and we got restored bikes, but that one's got some miles and stories on it. Anyway, that's a story of a person, and it's fresh.
Yes, that's outstanding. So now you say you've got 16 books you've written now. I know there's one you wrote, Motorcycle Adventure, which was the early, the first ride around the world by a guy named Carl Stearns Clancy. Tell us about that book. That book is, it sounds interesting. I like his history, and motorcycle history in those early days is fascinating to me.
About 25 years ago, I read 3 sentences in a book, coffee table book about Henderson motorcycles. And
Yeah.
those 3 sentences said that Carl Stearns Clancy had circled the globe in 1912 and 1913 on a Henderson. It hooked me. I have a Henderson motorcycle. I love it. I cherish it. So I could relate to that Henderson. I spent 16 years researching those 3 sentences to try
Okay.
to find his route, what boat he was on, what his driver's license looked like, what the deal he cut with Henderson back then. The Henderson brothers owned the company from 1911 to 1917 when they sold it to Mr. Schwinn, who went on to make bicycles.
Oh yeah.
But I had been under the impression that other guys had been the first, and I knew a couple guys that promoted themselves as being the first to circle the globe in the 1960s and 70s. Not so. Here's a 21-year-old guy in 1912 with a buddy, and they started out, the two of them, from New York to Dublin, and on day one, the other guy crashed out. They ended up parting ways, and the 21-year-old went on around the world by himself. But it took me 16 years to find all the pieces. That stuff wasn't on the internet. It was in dusty
Sure.
boxes at the bottom of the AMA Museum in Pickerington, Ohio. He wrote some articles, 25 articles for a magazine that was Bicycle and Motorcycle magazine in New York that went out of business in 1914. So I had to find those articles, and I had to find proof that this guy was really honest.
Legit.
There was no verification, but at the end, I felt comfortable enough to put my name on the book, and it's called Motorcycle Adventurer, and it's the recounting of his trip around the world in 1912, 1913, mostly from the magazine publications. When he finished the trip, he tried to rewrite that stuff. He got a manuscript done, and nobody would buy it. It went into the nether zone. But when my book came out, a guy in Australia wrote me and said, "Hey, I've got that manuscript that he couldn't sell. Are you interested?" And I said, "Oh yeah, send it to me." So that one I then republished with his editorial changes. And one of the things that he noted in the second one that wasn't in the first, he said, "When I made this trip, I left a boy. When I got back, I was a man." That's quite a statement for a 21-year-old guy that goes out there alone in 1912, 1913 to go through countries like Africa. Italy wouldn't let him take his motorcycle off the boat. Spain, they didn't know what to do with him. We were just done with the Spanish-American War, and here's an American showing up at their border. And there was no internet, nobody to call. He carried a gun with him. We can't do that today.
No.
He had a 6-shot 22 caliber handgun. But a great story. He went on to produce silent films in Hollywood. Never did anything with motorcycles again. But he went back to Europe that he traveled through in 1912, 1913 with a guy and made silent films. And that guy went on to fame and fortune. Carl Stearns Clancy kind of dropped. He didn't make the transition. That guy's name was Will Rogers. If you're old enough to remember Will Rogers, they made films called Will Rogers in Berlin, Will Rogers in London, Will Rogers in Paris, silent films.
Yeah.
But Carl Stearns Clancy did go on to write another kind of a book. It was called The Adventurous Sex. So he had the word adventure, but in his writing, all those 24, 25 articles he did for magazines, he never used the word adventure. But then when he came out with this small book, It was called The Adventurous Sex. It wasn't about motorcycles. It was about the opposite sex, and it wasn't sexually directed. It was just a hook. Um, then he made a film. You guys remember The Headless Horseman?
Oh yeah.
That ring a bell? The story of Ichabod Crane. Well,
Yep.
he used Will Rogers. He wrote the script for The Headless Horseman, which was about a 13-minute film. So he had his hands in a lot of interesting stuff, but he died in 1971 in Arlington, Virginia, working for the Department of Agriculture. And again, never did anything with motorcycles.
That's something.
He said if he were ever to make another trip around the world, he'd use another Henderson.
Okay.
But Hendersons back then were the choice by cops because they could outrun the Harleys and the Indians. But
They were beast.
amazing that a guy could go around the world with 7 horsepower, 933 cubic inch 4-cylinder engine with no front brake and no suspension. We have hundreds out there trying to do that right now with GPSs and electronics that make your head spin. And here's a guy that was able to do it without all of that stuff. So he had one hell of an adventure.
Oh, you look at even some of the old writings of people doing, coast to coast rides in the 1920s and the early 20s, and they talk about how difficult that was and the breakdowns and the issues. And I'm sure he had a lot of breakdowns. Found himself waiting around to get the thing fixed or taken care of before he could go on. So I can't imagine.
He said he landed in San Francisco, hooked up with another guy. They went San Francisco, Sacramento, and then north to Portland, Oregon, and then across from Portland, Oregon to Billings, Montana, and then Minneapolis down to Chicago and back to Connecticut. He did the Minneapolis piece alone. But anyway, he said the toughest part of his whole trip around the world was that section between Sacramento and Portland, Oregon. One day he said he fell down 17 times. That gets old picking up. I don't care what it is, 17 times in the mud ruts. But he said the toughest road in the world that he encountered was between Sacramento and Portland, Oregon.
Really? And now you got Route 5, and that's Highway 5, and that's just nice easy road.
And it covers a lot of the route that he took back then. They just kept building over the road.
Wow, that's something else. So now, out there riding, and going around the world. I mean, we talked about, you love the people and stuff like that. But where have you been that you really enjoyed riding?
I get asked that question in different ways a lot. What's the best? If you like mountains and twisties and perfect pavement, the Alps, Switzerland, northern Italy, southern Germany, Austria. But when it comes, the Alps are beautiful, but they're not as high as the Rocky Mountains.
No.
And when it comes to your off-road choices, again, I look at the Rocky Mountains and the mining roads in Colorado, for instance. If that's your, destination is to do gravel roads, Colorado is a tough place to beat. I went across Russia, which was 8 time zones, and I only had to do 45 miles of gravel.
Really?
People think, well, Russia's third world, but there was one road across Russia, and other than 42 miles of construction, it was pavement. And the other question is about scenery. And people go to the middle of Australia to look at one red rock.
Arid
rock. I tell people, you just go down to the corner of Utah and northern New Mexico, and in that Four Corners area, you got beautiful rocks. It made it into Easy Rider. They picked the right spot to go to. So I say that part of the world is if you're looking for scenery in Red Rocks. Save your trip to Ayers Rock for 3 days to look at one rock. It's right here in America.
Absolutely. That's good advice. I mean, I agree. I mean, I've done the Alps. I lived in northern Italy. You know, yeah, it's great riding. It's beautiful, but right here in our backyard. I mean, you talked early. You know, way back when, going to Sturgis. I'm sure you've been back, but that riding around there, I think that's what makes Sturgis special.
A lot of
riding.
Great scenery and roads in and around, the Black Hills.
Yep, absolutely. You know, that's wonderful stuff. So, books. Do you have, of your books? I mean, is there one in particular that stands out in your mind that you're particularly proud of or fond of?
Well, of course, I think all my books are great, but several of them are out of print. They were done back when you did, half tones and pasted them up and shot them with a camera. Those are out of the 16. I think only 6 are now available. I liked Motorcycle Sex because it was so controversial. It got me. It got me. I had guys, editors of big motorcycle magazines saying, Dr. Frazier, you are so bad. You are wrong. You are out there so far because you cannot mix motorcycles and sex. And yet I'd interviewed the chief designer for BMW motorcycles. And I asked him, is there any relationship between motorcycles and sex? And that designer said, it's all about sex. So I was glad when that editor lost his job. But anyway, Motorcycle Sex got me onto the radar screen. It's not a hard read. It may go up digital at the end of this year. We're playing with it. But that was in the 90s. I think my book Down and Out, which is a coffee table book, it's available as an ebook and also a print copy, is a good one. It talks about myself and how I got to how I do what I do. And it's a fun read. I think the Clancy book, Motorcycle Adventurer, for the guys that want to look back in history and don't believe that Charlie and Ewan were the first guys to go around the world on motorcycles for the Discovery Channel or ESPN, whoever they produced that for them. Anyway, Carl Stern's Clancy, it's a good historical look. And then my recent book called Frazier Shrugged, Adventure Motorcyclist. Just Google Frazier Shrugged. It's available now on Amazon and a couple of other places. We took a look at what adventure motorcycling is in the first part of this century. And our reflection, and I say our, I used an editor who's the senior editor at a magazine called Adventure Moto. And he and I picked through a number of things that I looked at in the previous 35 years doing what I do, which is adventure motorcycling. And we tried to give the reader a picture of what exactly is adventure motorcycling. Like I said in that Steppenwolf song, get out on a highway looking for adventure. That was 68. Now they're sticking the word adventure on adventure motorcycling underwear, adventure motorcycling boots, adventure motorcycling helmets. Anyway, we took a look at where and are you an adventure motorcyclist in this part of the 21st century. And that's a fresh book. That's just out. And we call it Exposing the Dirty Underbelly of Adventure Motorcycling, just to have a little fun. I don't take myself too serious. So when you read that book, you can laugh with me or you can laugh at me.
Okay. So now I particular will probably go order the Carl Stern's Clancy book that you wrote when we get off of here. So where should I order that from? Because, I want to make sure, because I look at what's happened to music artists. They used to be, they make a lot of money off their albums. They don't make any money off albums. So what do? They charge more money for their concerts and everything else. You don't really have that kind of ability necessarily to do that. Your book is your book. Okay. So where is it going to benefit you the most if we order books and other people that read this, see this podcast here?
The Big Gorilla, Amazon.com, has got the
Okay,
print copy or the digital
gotcha.
Kindle copy. Um, the the money that filters down to guys like me, uh, even if I were to try to market it myself, by the time I put all those things together, the Big Gorilla does a better job. So
Gotcha.
anyway, out there on the internet, Amazon.com, iUniverse is another source. That's the direct source, but
Okay.
that's where it can be found. And Amazon's got my current book. It just went up last month. Adventure Motorcyclist, Frazier Shrug. So, click
Okay.
on that one too. That one
Yeah, I
you
want
get
to check that out.
yeah, Carl. You get a look at Carl Stearns Clancy in Adventure Motorcyclist and his trip around the world, and then you get a laugh at me in Frazier Shrugged, which is a play on. You remember Aaron Rand's book Atlas Shrugged, where they got the guy holding up the globe of the world
Yeah.
on the cover. Well, that's where the cover for the Frazier Shrugged. Um, it's a little bit existential, but it's not a deep read. Um,
Okay.
it's a fun read.
Well, fun reads are good. I like fun reads when I'm traveling. Yeah. And when I do a fair amount of traveling, and something that's a fun read that's a little lighthearted, that just that changes my mode sometimes. 'Cause traveling can't is not always easy, as you know. And speaking of travel not being easy, I mean, tell us about some of the difficulties or dangers maybe you've run into. I mean, you've had to have.
Well, I've been thrown in jail in Honduras. That wasn't fun. That uh, is on my cranial hard drive is not to go back to Honduras again.
Well,
Uh,
I've ridden Honduras. I've been there. I mean, I spent a lot of time. So what happened there?
there were two cops, and one of them reached to take my second camera, saying I didn't need to, and I stepped back, and the cop fell down, and the one that was kind of watching traffic turned and saw his buddy laying on the ground and pulled his gun and pointed it at me. And then I really screwed up. I took his gun away.
Oh,
Uh, oh, uh, and then clicked on Dr. Greg's cranial hard drive. You've made a serious mistake here. And I gave his gun back, but they followed me to jail on a bicycle, one on the handlebars, holding a gun pointed at me on my motorcycle. Um, I think I paid about $260 to get out of jail. Anyway, that's Honduras. It's in a book out there called Riding South. Um, the tough parts for me, like tires. I don't like to carry tires. They're ugly. They get dirty. I've been a fan of Avon tires for 40 years. Um, they're not the choice of everybody, but I know exactly what I'm getting when I got them and how many miles I'm going to get out of them so I can plan the next depot or where to look for. And most importantly, what I'm going to get out of that tire. Avon Tire Company in England, they only make 350,000 tires in a year. There's a YouTube clip. Their tires are a piece of artwork. And so I've had some really junk tires. Happy to get them when I was on the road, but tires, and even for Clancy, he was using Goodyear tires shipped out ahead of him to get around the world. So tires are a difficulty. Clothing. What do you wear? I wear all the gear all the time. I'm a fan of a U.S. company called Arrow Stitch up in Duluth, Minnesota. I've been with their gear since 1997. There's different gear out there. There's cheaper gear, but I like their stuff. It's made in America. It's providing jobs in America, and they repair their stuff. And a guy like me that's fallen down on 6 of the 7 continents, I like a place where I can get it repaired. Anyway,
sure.
it's a team up there. Um, and then I think the final difficulty is overcoming your own beta factor, I call it, your fear factor.
Okay.
Take it on. Okay, great chatting with you. Um, let's do it again sometime. We'll talk about motorcycles and sex.
There you go. So before, um, so You mentioned something, you talked about, sending stuff ahead, and I was kind of curious about that because, people, preparation for trips like you did, it's a lot of preparation. Did you send things out ahead and pick those things up along the way, or did you just go with it?
The only things I've ever sent out ahead were tires.
Okay.
I had tires drop shipped to me in Germany after I left Africa. I wanted new tires to go across Russia, and I wanted my Avon tires. I could get other tires, but I knew Russia was 8 time zones, and so I had them shipped ahead. And then it's nice to have a little money waiting for you. Uh, I try to make sure that it can be shipped to me. I leave a considerable deposit with my attorney, who I hope when he gets the call doesn't say who,
Right.
but will wire me the money that I might need. I got to Africa one time and realized that I didn't have enough money, and I had to stop my trip, fly home, sell my truck, restock my money supply, and go back to Africa. So I've learned money really being out there, whether it's ahead of you or it's available. And uh, some other things that I've thought about shipping ahead was motorcycles, but they're so expensive to get across water. And the earth is 75% water now. And the price of a container, air cargo, you name it, you can no longer ride up to the air cargo depot in America and do your deal. You got to go through a freight forwarder, and it's expensive. Used to be able to do it for about $1,000. I'm looking at a guy right now. He's looking at $5,000 to get his Harley over to Europe. Uh, you can rent for $250 a day a
Yes.
really nice Harley, and uh, there's a month right there, and you don't have to maintain it and ship it back. So
Exactly.
shipping stuff out ahead, tough call. The price of mail, DHL and FedEx, all that stuff right now. Um, I think you're just going to have. I choose to be creative. I've been known to use some Honda parts on my American-made motorcycles, and I've been known to use some American-made motorcycle parts on my Japanese motorcycle and German motorcycles.
That's outstanding. So with every show that we do here, we ask our guests 3 questions. They're the same 3 questions of everybody, but we love the variety of answers. I think your answers are going to be very insightful. So I'm really looking forward to this. You ready for the questions?
Fire away, Mario.
Okay. So if you could go ride with anybody, living or past, who'd you like to ride with?
Carl Stearns Clancy.
There you go. That's pretty cool. And then if you could own any motorcycle, any motorcycle is available to you to own, what would it be?
Tough call. There's so many good motorcycles out there.
Yes, there is.
I'll go with my Henderson 1931.
Okay.
The book says if you've got one, love it and cherish it. It was the best motorcycle ever made. So I'll go with that.
And then the last one, if you could go ride anywhere in the world, and this is being you, somewhere that you haven't been, somewhere you'd like to go, where would you like to go?
Another tough question. I just finished 4,000 miles doing what I called a trip called Looking for America. Colorado, Nebraska, Iowa, Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana, Wyoming. And it was an eye-opener. I fall back on Kerouac's 150-page scroll that he did in 1950 or 51 with him and his buddy traveling back and forth across. We got a lot to offer in the United States of America, whether it's Hawaii, Alaska, or the lower 48. We've got everything everybody else has, and it's right here at our
I
fingertips.
sure do.
So that's my answer. Made in the USA.
There you go. Well, I think that's great. People hear that from you because you have a perspective that others don't. You know, you've seen it all, you wrote it all, um, and for people to hear that, to realize, hey, I've got everything right here to enjoy, appreciate. You know, be it from the mountain. I mean, look at Colorado. Great example. I mean, you can go across the high plains, end up in the mountains, drop down into um, Glenwood, Colorado, on the other side, you know, and it's nice and beautiful, you know. Well, Glenwood, that's halfway through. I'm trying to think of the name of the town on the other side, but then all of a sudden you're back in the desert. You're not too far from Monument Valley. You can be on the south side in the desert as well. Oil fields and everything else. You see it all just in one state for the most part.
Couldn't argue with you there. Not a
So,
bit.
so we really appreciate you coming on. We're gonna, you know, I hope everybody, you know, picks up one of your books, reads about your adventures, and gets a little bit of your insight. Um, if anybody wants to find out more about you, what's the best place to look?
Oh, Dr. Google. I look at him about once a month to see what I'm doing.
There you go.
Good, bad, or indifferent. The net's. I've worked in the industry for 35 years, so I worked for a lot of major magazines, and I have a dated website, but I'm out there. That's the net. They can find me, and I'm always happy to answer questions when people find me and have a question. I'm not a high-so guy. I'm a low-so guy. I learn more from the questions they ask me than I do from my answers.
That's wonderful. Well, I really appreciate you coming on. I know the folks that follow us are really going to enjoy this interview, and I hope to have you back someday. You know, maybe when you're out one of your adventures, we can talk about what you're in the middle of.
Sounds good to me, Mario. Some people say it's about the journey. At my age, I say it's about the miles.
I love it, Dr. Frazier. Thank you so much for coming on.
Ciao,
Have a
ciao.
good evening. Thanks. Good night.